Okay, we are going to review slope-intercept form. A couple reminders before we start. Remember that we're graphing lines, and those lines are made up of ordered pairs, x's and y's, and that's where our x and our y in this slope-intercept form come from. The m is our slope, and the b is the y-intercept. Okay. The b is where we begin when we're graphing. M is how we move. So our y-intercept is where everything begins, and our slope shows us how the line moves. Now we do need to get into some specifics about how these numbers are written in the equations, just so that you're clear. Our slope is going to be written, there are two ways that you'll see the slope. The first is as a fraction in simplest form. So you may see the slope written as a fraction. If it's a fraction, you've got to simplify that fraction. So you may see it written as y equals 2/3 x plus 10. That's an example where the slope is written as a fraction in simplest form. You wouldn't want 4/6. You'd want to simplify that. Second way that you may see slope written as an integer. So you may see, m equals 3. You would not want to write 3/1. I know that that shows our rise and our run. And when you're graphing, you may need to write the fraction so that you can see what the rise and the run is. But when we write the slope or you write your equation, you want to make sure that this number here doesn't have a 1 as the denominator. We want to keep that as an integer if it's an integer. Oops. The last thing to remember, no mixed numbers. Okay, if your slope is 5/2, you leave it 5/2. You would not make it 2 1/2. Because remember, our slope is a rise over run. So if I have 2 1/2, how does that whole number 2 come into play? It doesn't work. We leave it improper. The only time you don't leave the fraction improper is if you see something like this. You write it as a 3. Okay, we don't leave a 1 in the denominator. Okay, so for the y-intercept, let's talk about how to write the y-intercept. The y-intercept can be written as a number. Okay, so now this is when, if you're asked, what is the y-intercept, or what does b equal? Okay, so we're going to step aside from, we're not looking at equations right now, but it can be written as a number. So I could say b equals 3. So it can be as simple as just writing the number that you see from the equation. There is a second way that you'll see the y-intercept written, and you need to be aware of this so that on a test or a quiz, if you see it written this way, you know what they're talking about. The y-intercept can also be written as an ordered pair. Because the b is where the line crosses the y-axis. It's still a point. And because it's a point, you can write it as an ordered pair. So if you had the equation y equals 2x plus 4, you could write your y-intercept as a number and say b equals 4. Or you could write it as an ordered pair. 0, 4. If you were to look at a graph, the y-intercept is where it crosses the y-axis. And if you looked at the ordered pair that matched, you would see the x-coordinate is 0, the y-coordinate is 4. And we'll take a look at some examples as well so that you can see that what that looks like. You just want to make sure that b is an actual number that you're writing in the ordered pair. You wouldn't want to answer it 0b. And again, I'll show you what this all means as we go through the examples. All right, our first example, y equals negative x plus 2. So we want to identify the slope. Now the thing with our slope is, remember, it's the coefficient of x. So it's the number multiplied by x. But I don't see a number there. Well, if I don't see a number, there's actually a 1, isn't there? There is. So my slope is negative 1. My y-intercept is the number that's being added. Okay, so the number that's being added is a 2. Now I could also have written that as 0, 2. So I want you to write both ways. I want you to write 2 and 0, 2. And with our slope, let's write negative 1 and negative 1 over 1, because that gives us a rise and a run. You don't have to write rise over run, but just so you see that. All right, now we have our two important pieces of information, and we're going to start graphing. Remember, B is where we begin. We begin at the y-intercept of 2. Now, if I look at the ordered pair of this, do you see how the ordered pair would be 0, 2? That's where this comes in. Either way of writing this is acceptable. So my slope, or my y-intercept is 2. Now the m, or my slope, is how I move. My rise is negative 1. My run is 1. So I go down 1. Now remember, I'm not going down to negative 1. This is the movement. It's like how many moves I have. I'm going to go down negative 1, which means I go down 1. And then I run to the right 1. So my rise was negative 1. My run was 1. I could have also gone in the other direction. Remember, this whole fraction is negative. So I could have said 1 over negative 1. Because when I divide, I still get negative 1 as my answer. So don't forget, if one of those numbers is negative, you can actually choose which one you want to have a negative movement. Because if I look at this slope, I can rise 1 and then go backwards 1. So this would be a 1 rise and a negative 1 run. And no matter what, which way I go, this is going to be a horrible line. Hold on, let me just get a line. Oh, that's horrible. Hold on. That's much better. Okay. No matter which way I use my rise and my run, I still get the same line. Okay, don't forget to add your little arrows. The other thing to double check is my slope here is negative, which means my line should be going down from left to right. So double check those things as you're graphing. Those are little ways to check yourself. Next example. Negative 4/3 x minus 4. Now remember, our equation is y equals mx plus b. It's a plus here. So it's going to be a little bit tricky for some people to see the actual y-intercept if we have a subtraction problem. So your first step really should be to add the opposite. I want mx plus b. My slope will be negative 4/3. Remember, I could also have 4 over negative 3 As long as my negative sign is attached to one of my numbers, I'm fine. My y-intercept is -4, or I could write that as 0, -4. I want you to write both options on each. Okay, so we begin at -4 on the y-axis, or the point 0, -4. And then we'll use our slope to find the next point. Now, if I use this slope, down 4 to the right 3, I run out of room. So I'm actually going to use this slope because I can fit it on the graph. So I'm going to rise 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. You can draw the triangles or not. It's up to you. If you can mark it out just in your head, that's fine. And I'm going to run -3, which means I go backwards 3. And I'll take my line tool, connect my points, double check. I have a negative line here. I'm going down from left to right. My slope is also negative, so I'm good. My next example, y equals 4. If we look at our slope and our y-intercept, something strange is happening here. I don't have my y equals mx plus b format. If you don't have your y equals mx plus b format and you're asked to graph the line, you're going to be looking at one of these special cases of having a horizontal line or a vertical line. This is one of those cases where saying y equals 4 and I want you to graph it means that no matter what x is, y will always be 4. Okay, so if I were to draw a table of x's and y's, no matter what x I pick, y is always 4. I could pick any x. So what that means is no matter what x I pick, y is always 4. So we get a horizontal line. Same thing happens if you have an equation where it says x equals a number. So remember, if you're asked to graph and it's not in slope-intercept form and you only have an x or a y, be very careful because that will make a horizontal or a vertical line. If it says y equals 4, then that means no matter what x you pick, y is always 4. And that's it.